Hello, honeys, and welcome to your brand new episode, Jargonology, the terminal breakdown. Now, I'll admit, because today is a discussion on art terms, art historical techniques, so on, I could understand why you might assume this is going to be a pretty dry episode, but some of these are just funky or effectively tricky enough in practice to be worth talking about. To be even more honest, I either did not know or forgot what some of these were, so it's a good review for all of us, a good opportunity to clarify in advance for future episodes any terms we may be using. We're going to try and keep this short, sweet, fun, punchy, positive adjectives here, so let's just go ahead and begin. Our first section of the terminal breakdown will be terms that are useful for understanding parts, so to speak. They're components of an artwork or its creation. First, let's address materials that could be used in an artwork, primarily archival materials. Anything that comes with the term archival, whether it be paper, ink, boxes, means that it is made from materials that meet certain museum criteria for permanence, meaning that it's ligand-free, pH-neutral, alkaline buffered, stable in light, etc. In other words, says the National Park Service, they are inert. They don't release any products that could be harmful to collections as they degrade. While it's recommended that an artist and/or institution uses these archival materials at all times, including for storage, exhibition, and transport, we have some cost considerations here. We want to consider that some contemporary artists actually want their works to have this degradation process instead of longevity. This often means that you will see archival materials mostly when it comes to storage and transport. What's kind of fascinating about archival materials is that humans have been working with them for an incredibly long time, knowingly and not. This is why we can sometimes find such old artifacts, is through their archival self-preservative nature. For example, we can look at illuminated manuscripts. These would use expensive but long-lasting gold leaf, fine parchment, and pigments. That is why we still have some of these that are dated back to the 12 and 1300s, if not even earlier. Our next creation-related term is maquette, aka a bozzetto or modello. This is essentially a small sculptural model made out of wax or clay as a preliminary, as a prep study. It may be presented for approval of a proposed work or for entry in a competition, or it might never see the light of day. Maquettes are an important historical tool because they allow us to track the different stages in the design process leading up to a finished artwork. They can provide information about the form of an object that no longer exists as well. The maquette is a tradition as old as time. Michelangelo did one for his Pieta in 1591 and again for a separate work in 1600. Yet modern artists have frequently challenged these kind of provisional statuses of the maquette by making what they consider final, finished works in the sort of rough style of the maquette. Our next bit of jargon refers to a medium, in fact, a painting medium in which the binder is egg yolk. We're talking, of course, about tempera. So you may be asking, why combine egg yolk and pigment? It had a very medium kind of consistency, but a strong adherence. Tempera has a kind of unique ability to create lasting and stable colors when it's treated correctly. The downside of tempera use is that it dries very quickly and it does not blend. So artists would have to do one color, then many fine lines of another color on top to achieve shading effects. Tempera is a nearly universal medium throughout art history. It was used to design murals in ancient China, Mycenaean Greece, Egypt, Babylonia. Some of the most famous examples, however, came out of Southern Europe. These tempera works were often done on poplar wood planks bound tightly together, treated with gesso, a sort of liquid plaster that we'll get to in a minute. This was especially true of works that were designed to be easily transportable. Italian artists, in fact, used tempera almost exclusively until the end of the 1400s. Oil and canvas became popular after about 1500. To give you a sense of the colors and texture of tempera works, let's look at two very famous examples very quickly. Both Sandro Botticelli's famous The Birth of Venus as well as Primavera, both from 1486, are tempera works. The first shows Venus arriving at the seashore via a scallop shell, hair blowing in the wind and covering her nudity with her hands while angels sing around her. The second shows 9 figures from classical mythology advancing over a flowery lawn in a grove of orange and laurel trees. Both of these Botticelli works are historically significant because depictions of classical mythology subjects on such a large scale were virtually unprecedented in Western art. They had not been done since classical antiquity. Botticelli not only chose tempera because it was popular, but also because of the richness of color he could achieve with it in these 2 works. It allowed him to achieve, in the case of Venus, this weightless perfection, this imagination of a sea-misted moment. As Primavera is a work celebrating love, peace, and prosperity, there may be a tie between egg yolk used in tempera and the nature seen in the artwork. A much more recent and famous example is Christina's World by Andrew Wyeth of 1948. This piece depicts a young woman, his neighbor, seen from behind wearing a pink dress and lying in a grassy field with her upper body straining towards a distant farmhouse. Christina is shown this way because she preferred to drag herself around with her arms rather than use a wheelchair after developing a degenerative muscle condition. A quote from Wyeth regarding the piece: "The challenge to me was to do justice to her extraordinary conquest of a life which most people would consider hopeless." End quote. So this is clearly a very psychological and emotional work. It may be allowed for a visual tell of connections to the past through the use of a sort of antiquated medium. The use of tempera here also gives the image a sort of heroic sense by visually referencing the classics, the epics. There's also a physicality connection made through the tempera. We, of course, see Christina moving, but we also know he had to paint quickly in order to beat the drying time. Wyeth used tempera and panel for several other images of people. As he was known for aiming for regionalism and abstraction, I'm thinking there's an attempt here to harken back to portraits done in older styles with distorted bodies, natural scenery connections here between Christina's landscape and the Primavera one. Moving right along with the how it's made and/or its layers and components section, let's talk alla prima. This is a technique in which a painting is done in just one sitting with no under or over painting. This is basically the opposite of how Bob Ross did his things in layers. This is go, 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 go. The technique requires an artist to work fast and decisively before the surface paint dries. It also calls for direct painting, so the results tend to be described as bold, expressive, and painterly. A lot of modernist works, especially ones featured in our Colorworks episodes, are alla prima examples. And of course, opposite of alla prima, we have underpainting. This is a technique of creating a monochromatic version of an image, then allowing it to dry. After it dries, an artist then uses transparent and semi-transparent layers of paint known as glazes, which we will cover in just a second, to continue it, all the while allowing parts of this underpainting to peek through. This can increase the illusion of depth that a painting will achieve. And some famous examples you can look to understand what we're talking about here. First up, works by Francois Boucher, a Rococo artist who contributed to the dissemination of the underpainting style throughout Europe, and more specifically his work, The Adoration of the Shepherds. The piece is very similar in composition to an altarpiece of the same subject that was commissioned in 1750 by Madame de Pompadour, the famous mistress of Louis XV. We also see underpainting frequently used by William Turner, who lived 1775 to 1851. Turner was a celebrated Romantic painter who created turbulent atmospheric effects using watercolor and gouache combinations. His most famous work is almost definitely Rain, Steam, and Speed, The Great Western Railway. This is the image of a black train appearing through super misty atmosphere to cross a bridge. Our example for today, however, in terms of underpainting, is the Scarlet Sunset. Turner first used watercolors and later on created visual accents with gouache, and this allowed him to capture the atmosphere of the sunset setting on a foggy day very effectively in this painting. Next up, we have decoupage, aka the cutting out of paper designs and applying them to a surface to make an all-over collage. While I'm sure you're familiar with the term from the chokehold it had on the DIY Pinterest world for several years, it does have specific fine arts meanings as well. Its origins are thought to be in Eastern Siberian tomb art, but today we only have existing examples that go back as far as about 1490. Those remaining artifacts are the Diwan of Sultan Hasan Mirza's calligraphical and decoupage works. Decoupage spread through China into Italy and then into Europe at large. It blew up really in popularity in Florence in the 17th and 18th centuries. I was pleasantly surprised to learn about two very important decoupeurs in art history, so let's talk about them real quick. The first was Mary Delaney. She worked at the courts of George III and Charlotte after starting to make exceptionally detailed and botanically accurate depictions of plants. These were produced using tissue paper and hand coloration. What's really incredible is she got this appointment at the age of 71 in 1771. Delaney created over 1,700 decoupage pieces, called her paper mosaics, between the ages of 71 and 88 when her eyesight failed. Her works can be seen in the Enlightenment Gallery at the British Museum. A more recent example is a decoupeur from Waynesburg, Pennsylvania, J. Terry Jones, who holds multiple Guinness World Records for his extensive collections. Our next term explains exactly how we got those deep glowing hues and darks that came to typify the early masters' works, the process of glazing. This is where masters such as Rembrandt would apply multiple layers of transparent paint on top of the final pigment ones to create that shiny luster, that depth of glowing hue. And next we have gouache. This is an ancient technique that has evolved over time and across place. But as of 18th century France, it mostly refers to opaque watercolors that were often used for illustrations. This is because plein air artists and illustrators increasingly used gouache over their watercolors, ink, or pencil drawings and pastels. And now that we've covered all of the material and process-related terms, let's move along to perspectives and visual illusions. First, a nice and simple one, the bas-relief, actually spelled B-A-S, bas-relief. All this means is that the figures project from the background only a little. For example, as Lincoln's head does on the penny. The key thing about bas-relief is that it refers to inscribed details, often architectural ones like flowers, people, animals, etc., whose forms are not separated from a shared background. There's just the depth created by this little bit of projection. Foreshortening is also very effective. This is just a method of portraying forms on a 2D surface so they appear to project or recede from the picture plane. It's a way of kind of making somebody's arm look like it's coming at you by making it shorter and placing the knuckles towards your direction. And now getting into perspectives just a little further, let's talk pictorial space. Pictorial space just means the space in the painting, the space of illusion in a 2D artwork, the one that seems to recede backwards from the picture plane, giving some illusion of distance. Now, some perspectives are more obvious in name. For example, bird's eye or aerial view, of course, means looking down from above. Others are a little less so. For example, we have atmospheric perspective. This is a way to suggest three-dimensionality on a 2D surface by blurring, bluing, or misting the distant forms. This is often seen in easy art how-to reels. The technique is also sometimes called sfumato. S-F-U-M-A-T-O. Oh my God, that actually works. Sfumato's origins are in the Italian word for smoke. This is a technique of painting in thin glazes to achieve a hazy or cloudy atmosphere. Sfumato is often used to give the suggestion of objects or landscapes that are meant to be perceived as very distant from the picture plane. Funny enough, Mona Lisa, arguably the most famous painting of all time, is a key example of sfumato because everything behind her gets bluer and hazier the further back you go. Linear perspective is also a little more intuitive. It relies on two basic assumptions. First, that the forms that are meant to be perceived as far away from the viewer are made smaller than those that are meant to be perceived as close. Second, that parallel lines receding into the distance converge at one point on a horizon line, and that point is known as a vanishing point. The combination of bigger and smaller scales, as well as this visual narrowing to a point, creates a system of near and far in the brain that aligns with real life truths of vision and perception. And you can test this yourself at home. For example, I'm looking towards my front door of my apartment right now, and I'm seeing that each of the corners where the walls meet the ceiling converge towards the same distant point straight out ahead of me, or at least they look like they do. Another trick of perspective is the overlap effect. This is a creation of spatial relationships achieved by putting one object in front of the other, thereby suggesting that it's closer. And last but not least for perspectives, my personal favorite of the bunch, the trompe-l'œil. This is a French term literally meaning deception of the eye. It refers to a 2D work of art rendered in such a natural, realistic manner as to trick the viewer into thinking it's a 3D reality. This can be achieved with a variety of perspective techniques and devices, even combined ones. For an example of trompe-l'œil, you can look to Italian restaurants across the country and their paintings of false window frames with countryside views beyond them, which appear to have some depth and certainly have some detail. Trompe-l'œil can also be achieved in the sort of opposite manner. Think here of Magritte, his style of breaking the picture plane so that an object looks like it's jutting out of the surface of a painting. Both infringing and receding are examples of trompe-l'œil. For stylistic and descriptive terms, let's keep it nice and simple with just two. Number one, impasto. This refers to a thick, juicy application of paint to a canvas or other support via a brush or a knife, so one can really see the evidence of said tool. A work that is impasto emphasizes texture. It's distinguished from a smooth, flat surface. In fact, a surface with impasto is said to be pastos. If you're looking for examples, Hoffman is your guy. So is Van Gogh, and Monet, and Pollock, and Krasner. Well, I suppose the last one's your lady, but you know what I mean. The thing about impasto is that it has a sort of interchangeable companion term, painterly. Painterly is really just a fancy way to say that there are visible brush strokes, that the artist showed a clear interest in leaving evidence of the process of painting, of their own hand, their own mark, literal. And now we've hit, I would say, our specialty section. These are words used to describe specific aspects of a work, and they have unique or significant historically meanings. Our first is craquelure. This is the name for the fine network of cracks that appear on the surface of an oil painting or other material with time. It's caused by the shrinking and expanding of the paint or canvas due to changes in temperature and humidity across the artwork's lifetime. And here's an unforgettable, creepy connection to help you remember this term. I just so happened to be rewatching Hannibal, and this term was used to describe the crackling of an external preservative. It occurs to me I should give a trigger warning for gross true crime shows here. So there's that warning. Anyway, the preservative was used on a person's body. The investigators in this show then used the pollen found within the craquelure atop the victim's skin to solve the crime. If you have any interest in seeing this episode, it is season 2, episode 2. But I do not blame you if that is not your thing. And swiftly moving on, our next term, motif. This is an element, pattern, or design in an artwork that is often used repeatedly. It can also refer to a element, pattern, design that a specific artist uses again and again throughout their body of work. For an example of a motif being used across a career, we can look to Dali's melting clocks as well as his lobsters. We see them in the surrealist objects Lobster Telephone or Aphrodisiac Telephone. The piece touches on the connection in Dali's mind between food, sex, and communication. It's important here that the crustacean's tail, which is where its, spicy parts are located, are placed directly over the mouthpiece. Dali consistently used these aphrodisiac associations of the lobster to bring in ideas about eroticism and pleasure. Yet the clocks, made soft and non-functioning in his works, are symbols for the lack of meaning and fluidity of time in his dream worlds. And last but not least, let's look at our terms that have bigger meanings, ones that connect to specific parts of culture, ones that have fun histories, ones that might just be plain out weird. A sort of obvious example and our starter term for this section, abstract. Abstract refers to anything other than accurate representation of a person, place, or other noun. You can see ATPPO Part 3 Colorworks for a lot more examples and in-depth review of this term, but anything abstract is not what the naked eye sees. We then have chiaroscuro. This is chiaroscuro, and it refers to the rendering of forms through a balanced contrast of light and dark areas. The construction of the term refers to the Italian words for both light and dark, and it was introduced really during the Renaissance. Chiaroscuro refers to this strong, dramatic contrast within a painting or drawing. It's often used to create a convincing sense of volume and dimensionality. Both Caravaggio and Rembrandt were painters who excelled in the use of this technique. Dutch Golden Age painter Rembrandt mastered this style of painting. He used a lot of rich, deep, earthy shades, accented by lighter tones to create believable spatial depth, as well as a physical weight to his sitters. His mastery of chiaroscuro is best seen in two different artworks that are pretty famous of his. First, The Night Watch. Here, Rembrandt uses it to convincingly suggest to the viewer that there is torchlight coming from within the painting. He creates this playful, action-packed sense of shadow interactions. Another is The Anatomy Lesson of Dr. Nicholas Tulp. In that piece, the shadow and light contrasts add to the drama of this bodily dissection scene, to the creepy atmosphere given by the sense that the viewer is a voyeur. The shadowy nature of the actions as well as the setting increase the sense of excitement, the sense that something is being done that should not be done. Yet Caravaggio is widely considered the father of tenebrism. Tenebrism is an extreme sort of chiaroscuro in which the light and dark contrast is heightened specifically to create the sort of tension and unease that we would see in the anatomy lesson. Almost any single Caravaggio work you look at, you can see tenebrism, if not chiaroscuro. He's very popularly recognized for this technique. But maybe the most iconic example of all is Vermeer's Girl with a Pearl Earring from 1665. You'll notice here there's almost no background. You see just her dramatic face lit with the shadows behind her impenetrable. The focus of this image is on the dramatic reaction without any clues as to the source of what she's reacting to. This makes Girl with a Pearl Earring a really great example of tenebrism. Next up, we have The Exquisite Corpse. This is actually a collaborative drawing game first invented in 1925 in Paris. Those credited with the game's invention include the surrealists Yves Tanguy, Jacques Prévert, André Breton, and Marcel Duchamp. The game is fascinating because its sole intention is to create bizarre, intuitive drawings. The term exquisite corpse, or in its original French, cadavre exquis, was derived from a phrase that resulted when the group first played the game. Le cadavre exquis boira le vin nouveau, aka the exquisite corpse will drink new wine. The game goes like this. Players draw a section of the body in turn on a sheet of paper, folding it along the way to conceal what they drew and passing it on to the next, who draws the next section. At the end, you have these weird-ass bodies to laugh at. It's sort of a visual telephone game. The Exquisite Corpse is important not only as an indicator of the sort of surrealist social activities, what they thought was important to talk about when they got together to exchange ideas or else party, but we can appreciate this unique idea, the fascinating results it likely had. The Exquisite Corpse is an important game because it allows us, through the few remaining final drawings that we have, to understand how each artist who participated saw the body, what they thought of each body part, how these visions came together or clashed within the group. Let's pause for a moment on Fauvism and the Fauvist movement. The term Fauvism comes from one meaning wild beast. This was a short-lived painting style in the early 20th century, mostly in France. It featured bold, often clashing, and arbitrary colors, meaning not ones associated with the color of things in nature. Out of its practitioners, Henri Matisse was the best known, with works like Woman with a Hat from 1905, Lux Calme et Volupte 1904, but other artists who dabbled in it include Georges Braque, who's much more famous for his Cubist works, And Vlaminck, who you would know if you saw him. He's almost like if Matisse did his colors in blocky forms. One of his more famous works is The River Seine at Chateau from 1906. And here's a really juicy one for you, the term genre art. This is one with a bit of a confusing backstory in the visual arts. Historically, it referred to a painting of a person or people in everyday situations who were just simply not identified. But at different points in history, it could also include still life painting, animal painting, and landscape, as well as marine life painting. So what then does genre art look like if it encapsulates all these different things? Well, a few famous examples of the former, the people in everyday situations unidentified, we look to Vermeer's The Kitchen Maid, wherein the main figure stands in the kitchen before a window. She's seen in three-quarter profile, prepping milk and bread for a meal in a relatively nice dress. We can also see Rembrandt's Anatomy Lesson and also Judith Leister's The Young Flute Player, wherein a young musician looks not at the painter, but up and away, is doing their practicing in their fine day wear. As I said, the term evolved as the centuries went on, so an example for much later in our art historical timeline, we shift over to Caillat's Paris Street Rainy Day, the one where the dude with the top hat and the umbrella seems to be walking past on a sidewalk as you look out at a major intersection. This later example has connections to our earlier ones via the incorporation of landscape background as well as a person in this artwork. And here's a kind of niche one for you if you want to sound fancy, the hors commerce. The term literally means before commerce, and it typically refers to sculpture or graphics marked by an artist for business use only. Oftentimes, these pieces are only used for entering into exhibitions or competitions. They were not, for most of art history, typically seen by the public. What is fascinating is that the role of the hors commerce has been taken over by something called an artist's proof. This is essentially an addition of an artwork outside of the regularly counted ones. And it's done this because, in part by custom, the artist hangs on to an artist's proof for personal use or sale. So we see in the evolution of and the exchanging of roles between artist's proof and hors commerce how artists interact with an arts market across the centuries. Our next term swings us back to the science side of art history very briefly, pentimento. Pentimento refers to compositional changes made by an artist that in turn become visible over time by the lightening, especially of lead-based paints within an artwork. The process of pentimento is neat and historically significant because it allows us to discover old stories hiding behind the artwork. It shows us these alterations, original lines and structures that the artist may have changed throughout the process of painting. These hidden changed layers, pentimentos, can also be uncovered through infrared or X-ray scans. Very famous examples of artworks that have pentimentos. First, the Arnolfini wedding portrait. Created in 1434 by Jan van Eyck, various scans and examinations of the pentimentos of that piece have revealed changes to the positions of one of the spouse's hands. One of the reasons that this is one of the most famous paintings of all time, definitely one you'll hear about in almost any art history course, is the extreme attention to detail, the amount of substance and reflections even via mirrors on the far wall that Van Eyck was able to use to create this illusion of depth, that is. Yet the pentimentos reveal exactly how much effort it took to successfully pull this off. We see several modifications to Arnolfini's feet and legs in the reflected area. And as we talked about way back when with beauty scandals, there are definite pentimentos, important changes in the Madame X portrait. Pentimenti are not only important for allowing us to understand the artist's thinking and creative process, they can also be used as part of the authentication process. Because copies do not usually have such compositional changes made along the way because the final result is kind of determined, experts can therefore use pentimenti as further evidence in support or against a work's verification. Take, for example, the case of Manet's Le Déjeuner sur l'herbe, or The Luncheon on the Grass. The discovery and subsequent research on pentimentos found in that work allowed us to understand better a smaller version of the painting housed in a different London gallery, the Courtauld. We now know that the Cortal Institute is a preparatory work predating the original, not the other way around. And your last term of the day, honeys, tableau. This refers to a painting or photograph where the characters are arranged for this picturesque, dramatic effect, but they don't appear aware of the existence of a viewer. They seem completely absorbed in what they're doing. The foremost and definitely most famous example is, of course, Da Vinci's Last Supper, but other very recognizable ones include Rockwell's Dinner Table, as well as Renoir's Luncheon of the Boating Party from 1881. What's unique and important about tableaus is that they allow the viewer to self-insert, to picture themselves as part of the story. Such pieces often hint at the immediate past in order to explain the present narrative as well as future possibilities. So they're unique, sort of self-encapsulated yet accessible stories. Tableaus are a long-established tool of art and art history in order to make us feel a personal stake in what's going on in the action. All right, honeys, congratulations. You have made it through the A, B, C, D, E, F, Gs even of art and art historical terms. Very glad you decided to take this journey with me. Hope you learned something along the way, and I hope especially that you'll be able to use what you learned today to help you better understand future episodes. I'm grateful to feel and be finally caught up on our episode releases. Feel free, of course, as always, to leave a comment or a request for more information, or if there's something in particular you want to hear about. In the meantime, though, stay safe, stay hydrated, and take care of yourselves, honeys. We'll talk soon. This podcast is produced, created, hosted, formerly edited, and fact-checked by master's degree holder Celia Bugno. Chris Meinhold is responsible for our editing, mixing, and our intro and outro music. Special thanks to him for that. And as always, remember to like, subscribe, share, comment, so on all your favorite listening as well as social media channels.